Hey everyone, my name is Jade. I'm a mindset coach and personal trainer specializing in HA and ED recovery. I'm very excited to introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Rachel, and she's a hormone coach and fertility awareness educator who helps women learn to naturally balance their hormones and manage their fertility. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on.
I'm so excited to be speaking to you because it's one of those strange dynamics where there's so many women in the world, and yet when it comes to our fertility, it's a complete misstep for so many women. And I think going back to being in high school, thinking that we could fall pregnant any day of the month, leading into, in our situation with a lot of the listeners, following a fitness journey and losing their period when they're just on the pursuit of health. Now we're in a position where we've got things like the fertility awareness method. We've got really fantastic femtech. Like personally, I'm a massive fan of Temp Drop. It helped me conceive my son, and I also used it to cycle sync my training. So I know when things are getting too intense and when I can rev things up a little bit based on that data. And we actually connected from a promotion you were doing with a Temp Drop. So perhaps we could jump in there and describe how the fertility awareness method works and why taking temperatures is so important to that process.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll first off just start by saying that so often women get confused what it means to actually track your cycle. I think there's so many apps out there that predict your fertile window, and a lot of women use them just, simply plugging in their last period and following what the app says. But really, that's just a prediction. We really want to be tracking our biomarkers effectively in order to really, truly identify our fertile window. So temperature being one of those really important biomarkers, that is the best way to tell us that we ovulated. So when our temperature goes up, that's essentially telling us that the egg has left the follicle and progesterone has been produced, and progesterone is what actually raises our temperature. So that's the first really important biomarker. And then the second one is cervical mucus. So this is helping you identify when your fertile window begins for the month. So throughout the month, we kind of have these changes in the fluid, and it gives us a lot of insight into not only our fertility, but also our health. So we're really looking for that sometimes lotiony, sometimes egg white-like, depending on the type of mucus around that ovulatory window. And again, that's going to tell us when our fertile window began.
Wonderful. And sometimes it can be confronting for women to be describing cervical mucus or even observing it. It's been one of those things where it's like, oh, icky, sticky, don't look. And then we get slingshot into the realm where we're trying to conceive and we need to be observing all of these things. When I discuss cervical mucus with other women, and in particular egg white cervical mucus, I'll either describe it as sort of like an egg white stringy between the fingers, or if you go to the bathroom and wipe with toilet paper, it's quite slippery. Is there any other ways that you would describe it in case those two things don't really connect with women?
Yeah, I'm with you. I remember when I first found out about cervical mucus. I think it's also the word, right? Mucus is not
Mucus. It's not
the most
pretty, is
flattering
it?
word, but it really is mostly water. It's nothing gross. It's so natural and it's so important for our health. So we have these three different types of mucus throughout the month. The first type is our dry mucus, which is our non-fertile type of mucus. And this is generally like sticky, tacky, doesn't have any stretch. When we wipe, it's going to be halting and dry. There's not going to be any sensation. And then as our estrogen starts to increase throughout the month, then we start experiencing what we call non-peak mucus. Non-peak mucus is more lotiony, typically has some stretch. When you wipe, you may notice like a moist sensation. And then as your estrogen reaches its height for the month, then you should be seeing that egg white-like mucus. So this is generally clear, cloudy clear, and when you wipe, it is slippery and lubricative and pretty obvious. I generally have women have a reaction to seeing their first peak mucus. They're like, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about because it is abundant and pretty pretty different than what we experience throughout the rest of the month.
Yeah, the feedback of, let's say, a surge of hormones can be quite confronting. Some of the women that I work with as well might not have had any cervical mucus for quite some time, and then just as their period approaches, as you said, it's very obvious what has occurred, and often almost like a startle occurs when they go to the bathroom, with coupled with a sense of pride because obviously their body's finally working again. When we're trying to conceive, as you said, the app's trusting that they've got the right timing isn't the most beneficial process. We really need to take ownership of where our body's at based on our personal biomarkers. Where do you think women may be getting misled with the apps versus perhaps taking on themselves to really work out when their fertile window is?
I feel like there's just so much confusing information out there. I even remember when I first wanted to learn how to naturally manage my fertility and spending time on Google, and I felt like I was getting a million different answers. And I don't know, there's just so many apps promoted out there now that tell us, oh, well, this is a great way to identify when your period's going to arrive or when you're in your fertile window. And we just aren't given the information that we need too, right? This isn't stuff that we're taught about in school. And a lot of our friends aren't knowledgeable about it. Our moms weren't knowledgeable about it. So I feel like it's kind of just almost it's just at the start of getting known, right? Of how to properly track your cycle. And women are really starting to get interested in how to tune into their body in this way.
What's your opinion on LH strips?
So LH strips, I think, they can be great to give you more information, but they are also just predictors that you might ovulate. They are not going to tell you that you for sure are going to ovulate. So I see sometimes women get an LH positive and we don't see a temperature rise after that, meaning they didn't ovulate. And then they continue to test, and then maybe later in their cycle, they get another LH positive, and then they finally do see that temperature rise. So yeah, they can give some insight, but they aren't a true confirmation that you are going to ovulate. So we don't want to rely on them either.
LH strips come up a lot in the community of women that I work with, and some of the scenarios that occur quite regularly is, one, they're using LH strips as a predictor and they're not falling pregnant, which, to your point, could be the mistiming of the temperature rise. But the other thing is perhaps they have had the temperature rise and the LH strip didn't show up anything. When I saw a acupuncturist for my HA recovery, he suggested that depending on when that rise happens, it might not be a strong enough concentration to be in the urine to then show up on the LH strip. What's your thoughts on LH strips? And sometimes you might have actually ovulated, you've had the temperature rise, you've seen it, but perhaps you've done morning, lunchtime, and dinner LH strips for multiple days, and you haven't seen the line show up.
Yeah, I always tell my clients the two most important biomarkers are going to be that cervical mucus and basal body temperature. LH strips are kind of just an additional thing we can use for more information. But to your point, yeah, they can be a little bit confusing. Some women can have on the other end tons of LH positives in a row, and they're like, okay, well, what's going on? What was my actual LH positive day? And then some women don't see an LH positive at all. So LH responds to the increase in estrogen. So it could be potentially, maybe this woman didn't have strong sex hormone production. She didn't have strong enough estrogen that's creating that rise, or just not a strong enough ovulation in general. So yeah, there could be a few factors that contribute to that.
If someone's listening right now and they want to make the most of their ovulation and trying to conceive, what would your top tips for them to be, and in particular observations on when timing is right?
Top tips lifestyle wise or tracking?
Both. Give us all
Both.
of it.
All of it. Well, we'll just start with tracking since we're on that subject. I would definitely invest in a good basal body temperature thermometer like Tempdrop. I am a huge fan of Tempdrop compared to oral thermometers, because the oral thermometers just have so much criteria. You have to come out of 3 hours of consistent sleep. You have to grab your thermometer immediately upon waking. And, I did that for 5 years and it was always stressful for me. It never became something that was just part of my routine. So when I found out about the temp drop and knowing that all that criteria went out the window, I'm like, I am all in. Also great for new moms too, or moms in general who are waking up at random hours of the night and can't really control their sleep as much. So I would first start just investing in a really good basal body temperature thermometer and getting familiar with how to practice fertility awareness method, getting familiar with how to identify the different types of mucus and observing, am I seeing that fertile mucus around my ovulatory window? If you're not seeing it, then that can be a little bit of a red flag, right? That maybe your body doesn't feel supported enough to create that quality mucus. And yeah, so just getting familiar with fertility awareness and making sure that you're hitting those healthy numbers in your cycle in general. So looking for a bleed that is 3 to 7 days long with at least one heavy to medium day of bleeding, looking for at least 2 days of quality cervical fertile mucus, and a luteal phase, so number of high temperatures of at least 9 days. I like to say ideally 11, but 9 is still considered healthy range. That's going to give you insight into if you're producing enough progesterone. So getting familiar with your cycle, using it as a monthly report card in some of those ways. And then with lifestyle, as I mentioned just a minute ago, our body needs to feel safe. And what I mean by that is how is your nervous system, right? Are you living in fight or flight? Like so many women are, because that's not going to make your body feel safe. Our body does not prioritize reproduction. It's going to prioritize everything else. And if your body thinks it's under attack, right? Like thinks it has to run from a tiger at any minute, it's not going to be like, oh, this is a great time to have a baby, right? Like I am under stress for some reason and I need to prioritize that. So looking at nervous system regulation, making sure that you are nourishing your body. I speak to so many women who are under eating and have no idea that they're under eating. And they are worried about gaining weight by eating more and eating sufficient calories, but our metabolism follows, right? When you're not eating enough, eating like a toddler, then your metabolism is going to be like a lot slower, right? And when you increase your calories, your metabolism will follow and you're going to feel so much more nourished and so much more energized. And you're going to give your body that fuel to ovulate, and it's going to feel safe enough to carry a child. Also looking at things like blood sugar balancing. I talk about this with all of my clients. I am personally not a fan of counting calories or anything like that. I like to take a really intuitive approach. But one thing I do recommend that women have an awareness about is how much protein they're eating. Where is your protein at for the day? Just kind of getting an idea. You don't need to track like crazy, but just getting familiar with, how much protein is in certain foods that you're eating, and aiming to get like 20 to 30 grams in each meal. That's going to be great for blood sugar balancing. And then just balancing your meals in general. So getting in proteins and fats and carbs, lots of whole foods. So that's one thing. I mean, there's so many things. Gut health is important as well.
No,
Yeah.
it all ties in. And a lot of our listeners, as I said earlier, they are suffering with HA and eating disorders. So that the fight or flight kicks in just from the energy expenditure, like copious amounts of hours of training, and then obviously the undernourishing. So when coupled together is quite the mix. But for other women, it could just be in one category or the other.
Right.
And to your point, one of the biggest markers to move forward really has been on the nutritional front. The training definitely complements it, like training within moderation and with intention is probably the best word, rather than trying to burn everything off or prove that you can do so many hours or prove that you can do this or prove that you can lift that. But instead actually having a program to follow so that you can still be getting the results you desire, but without almost having a spaghetti at the wall situation where you're just hoping everything works out. And in the meantime, you just pedal to the metal all day long. Um, on the nutritional side of things, you touched on protein, which I love because it really is such an important part of our nutritional intake and for our body to thrive, whether you're having issues with hormones or not. It's such a wonderful marker for our health. Women that you've worked with, if they are trying to fall pregnant and perhaps their nutrition is lacking, have you found that there's a particular way to angle things that makes them a little bit more welcoming of nutritional changes? I'm purely curious because you're not necessarily in an eating disorder realm, but there's no doubt you have spoken with women who fall into eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors, one or the other. Based on those conversations, rather than the therapeutic approach, more empathy or just understanding, is there something that tends to ring true with women when you share it with them?
Yeah, I think it's really important for me in my coaching that I always explain not only just the how, but also the why behind everything. So why are we doing this? Because sometimes when we just say, okay, this is what you need to do, some women are like, oh, I'll just maybe do everything else but that, right? If it doesn't resonate.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'll,
when
I'll
you,
skip this one. Let's slide it under the table.
yeah, I'll just pretend I didn't hear that. But when you explain the why, I think it really hits home, right? Especially for somebody who is maybe trying to conceive. And you say, hey, it's really important that you eat enough protein so that your blood sugar is balanced. And then that's going to further regulate your nervous system. And that's going to give your body the energy and the ability to feel safe so that you can ovulate and carry a healthy baby, things like that. I think, yeah, they just really explaining the why goes a long way. And I'm always very gentle with my clients too, because I know so many women struggle with body image and eating disorders, whether it's current or in the past. But it's something that a lot of women have dealt with. And I always try to just really give little tips and little suggestions throughout their coaching to kind of reframe their mindset, just reminding them that we need to eat because we need to eat and we need to exercise because we love our body, and just kind of helping them learn some practices to have appreciation and trust in their body, which I think so many of us don't have.
No, it's definitely something that women need to work on. But I think with all the information we've got available to us, we're creating a world where women are now making it a priority. Like I could easily sit there and kind of demonize the health and fitness industry for, so me personally, I lost my period for 6 years due to my health and fitness goals. And I recovered it. I've got my two babies. Like life is wonderful now. But as a result of all the women just like me going through similar scenarios and then healing, I feel like the next generation is going to be so much more empowered because we're going to be the mothers protecting our daughters from these missteps. Because like my mum had no idea about these things. Half the women that I work with, their parents had no idea. The idea that your period can go missing from exercise is crazy. Or but you're so fit and healthy. There's nothing wrong with you because it's just coming from a perception. It's how you look. It's not how they're thinking or how they're feeling. So I am excited to see what unravels in the future, both on the awareness front for the fertility awareness methods and just for that mindset of women taking responsibility and ownership of how they really can care for their body. I have one more question, if it's okay.
Sure.
Now, women transitioning off the pill, really common, whether it be because they want to fall pregnant or perhaps they've learned of the side effects of being on the pill and they no longer want that in their body. What are some normal things we can expect when transitioning on the pill, and what are some red flags?
Yeah, I think this is actually majority of my clients. They are coming off of hormonal birth control. I help them through the transition so that they can ovulate as soon as possible, feel their best, and not experience what is called post-birth control syndrome, which are a variety of symptoms that can come up when your body doesn't feel supported through that transition. So yeah, it's really important, in my opinion, to prepare your body to transition off of the pill. So doing a lot of the things that I mentioned before, just looking at the body as a whole, taking a holistic approach and starting to implement some things to regulate your nervous system, improve your gut health, and balance your blood sugar. Look at environmental toxins, just really look at everything and see how can I even support my liver, right, to detox those synthetic hormones as I transition off. And I see when women do that preparation, they ovulate pretty soon. They ovulate within the first couple months. Women who are struggling to implement some of these things, it may take a little bit longer for their cycle to regulate, for them to start seeing consistent ovulations. So it really does come down to how supported does your body feel through that transition and in general. And our cycle is truly this monthly report card. And so when we are not ovulating and we are not seeing our cycle return, we want to always ask that question of, how well am I supporting my body right now as a woman in my childbearing years? Because like you mentioned, there's so much confusing information out there online of how to live a healthy life. And we really need to understand, how can I support my body as a woman in my childbearing years? And that looks different than what is supportive of a man, right? Or even a woman who's postmenopausal. So yeah, it looks different for everyone. I can't say that there's the same thing that happens for every single woman who comes off the pill. It's dependent on so many factors, how well they're supporting their body, how long they've been on the pill, things like that. So, or what type of birth control they were on even can have an impact as well.
Let's say a woman has come off the pill and the period hasn't returned, and they go to the doctor and the doctor says, give it another 6 months, 12 months, right? Because that can be common feedback. It's no big deal. Just wait it out. It'll come. What do you think the appropriate timeline for your period to return is? So if you were to go to the doctor, your period's not there, and they say, don't worry about it, you have the power to go, actually, I am worried about it, and I'd like to see it through further. Because sometimes it can be intimidating when you feel like something's off, and then the medical practitioner you go to shrugs you off completely.
Mm-hmm.
What timeframes do you think would be enough to go, no, this needs investigating, or perhaps I need more support, or I need medical help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happens all the time with medical practitioners. I get messages all the time from women who say, oh, I don't have a period, and my doctor told me I need to get back on
Oh, a
hormonal birth
pill. Oh, I know.
to get my quote unquote period, which is not even a true
A real
period.
period. I know. I cringe still. I've heard so many stories of it. Until this day, I can't. Because it's so popular in our community, where it's like, and especially when you've got women who are already in a fight flight response, who are worried about their health, and then they're led to believe, unless you go back on the pill, you're going to get osteoporosis, you're going to be at risk of all these other things, and then they go back on because they're afraid, only to realize it's a complete band-aid. I'm so shocked it's still suggested by practitioners that that's the way to fix a period, given
Yeah,
what we know. Like, it's, the information's out there. It's not like it's new information. It's been around for so long now.
I know. It's so wild. So yeah, I guess number one, don't go back on the pill to quote unquote regulate your period, because it doesn't do that. It's just going to put a band-aid on it and shut off your reproductive system. But as far as the timeline, I've worked with hundreds of women, and when they give their body the right support, 90% of them will ovulate within those first 2 months.
Sure.
If it takes longer, then we are always kind of investigating those things that I mentioned. What's going on and why is your body not feeling safe enough to ovulate? Sometimes investigating further too into things like PCOS, if that's a potential contributing factor as to why their cycle isn't regulating or why they're not ovulating. So yeah, I almost hate to give timelines sometimes because I don't want women to have these expectations. I think the main focus is just to
Well,
ask.
let's pretend someone's doing it on their own. They're not ready to seek help of a fertility awareness educator or a nutritionist or an obstetrician or a gynecologist. They just, what would be a good timeline to perhaps question, oh, maybe I need support?
Yeah, maybe around that three-ish month mark, because we also want to prevent post-birth control syndrome from happening, which typically does happen around that 4 to 6 month mark is where women
Okay.
start noticing all these symptoms come up. So if you are maybe around that 3 month mark, you're still not seeing an ovulation, then maybe seeking out support or just looking into deeper as to how you can support your hormone health so that you get your body on track and you don't feel these symptoms come up in the next few months.
Amazing. Look, I do have one more question that's popped into my mind because I know it comes up so much with my listeners, and then I'll gratefully thank you for your time. But unovulatory cycles, if you're regularly having a bleed,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the chances you're having unovulatory cycles? Because in certain communities, if and more relying on LH strips and a temperature, if they're not getting the LH strip, but their bleed's still arriving, they're feeling this, I haven't ovulated, it hasn't happened. But how likely is it that you can have an unovulatory cycle when you are indeed getting your period, let's say regularly, 28 to 35 days?
So if you are not getting an LH positive, I would start tracking your temperature because that is the best way to tell you that you've ovulated. As far as having an anovulatory cycle and not being on hormonal birth control, typically those cycles will be pretty long because your body probably tried to attempt to ovulate a few times. During that time, if you were still, producing estrogen, you're thickening up an endometrium lining. And that can lead to a withdrawal bleed because eventually your body just gets to the point where it's like, okay, I haven't ovulated, but I built up this endometrium lining and it still needs to go somewhere. So that can result in an ovulatory cycle and a withdrawal bleed. But I I typically don't see too many anovulatory cycles in my practice.
Mm. Yeah, things that I've researched, it seems like it's quite a rare occurrence if the bleed is occurring. And as you said, to the 3 to 7 days medium flow for 2 of those days, you're hitting those criteria. But it can be a bit of a fearful thing in the community I'm in where women are led to believe that these unovulatory cycles are happening all the time. And because they're so desperate to fall pregnant, it just adds to the fear and the distrust for their body. Now, I am so grateful for your time. I feel like I've learned so many things as well. And the women listening, I know, will have been taking notes to things that you've been sharing with us. Rachel, if anyone wants to reach out and connect with you, where can they find you?
So the best way to find me right now is on my Instagram at High Unhealthy. I'm pretty active on there. I also have a website, highonhormones.com. And yeah, that's pretty much the platform I prioritize. I also have a Facebook group, but can't say I'm as active in there.
Amazing. I'll put all those links in the show notes anyway. So if any of our listeners want to jump over and come say hello, they can absolutely do that. Ladies, thanks so much for joining in on today's episode. If you loved it, please do subscribe or follow the podcast, and we will see you in the next one. Bye for now.